I'm not prepared to speak about an Austrian spatial development concept in a precise way as Boris Schremmer now just did, because there is no such thing comparable to the spatial development plan for Serbia, not for Austria. I will try to summarize the development of Austrian spatial planning profession, planning instruments, planning documents, and what are the main challenges for Austria as I see them now, or as they are seen in some of the major documents. And before that, I will shortly describe the institutional setting Austria is having in terms of spatial planning and regional development. We have then an overview of some of the approaches, national level, spatial oriented or sectorial oriented. Then I will go, only after that, I will go into the challenges as I or the documents see them, and try to come up to have a summary conclusion. What are the major challenges now? What can we do for the next years to come? What are our options? And in the end, I would like just to illustrate some of what I've said before, examples of late spatial development projects in Austria, just to give a few pictures and images of what's going on. Please. The institutional setting is very different from the Serbian one, and I will just illustrate it in a graph. We have 4 spatial levels: national, regional on a NUTS 3 level, and local level. And just as Boris described, he has described 250 municipalities in Serbia. We have 2,600 in Austria, in a country of a similar size and population. We have 9 regions, which are very independent. And we have a national level, which is collecting much of the money, but not exerting the same power as the money it collects. So this is a situation very different here. There's no federal planning competence. There's no national planning competence in Austria whatsoever. There's planning competencies at the regional level, the Länder level, and especially on the local level in spatial terms. So what we have to do, if we talk about spatial development strategies for the country as a whole, we have to bring all these players together. And there is an institution called ÖROC, Austrian Spatial Planning Commission, producing in every 10 years an Austrian spatial development concept and other acts. These are non-binding documents. They are not legally founded. They're not declared by Parliament whatsoever. Parallel to that, there's a number of sectoral policies, especially from the national level, and they go all the way through, have their impact on local level. And I show it in a symbolic way how things work in Austria. We have a bottom-up approach in terms of local spatial planning, municipal planning, housing policy, distributing land use. We have some regional development in Austria at a smaller scale. That's 2 is too big, that's 3 level or even smaller. And then we have sectoral legislation and money going top-down the other direction. And what we do not have is this missing link. We have a spatial development concept, but it is not binding. It is not concrete in a way that these 2 approaches have to be integrated and bargained. There is no political bargain on a coherent way. We have these 2 approaches conceptually independent, but what in political practice happens very often, of course, they are linked politically. So if something comes up as a want from below, it goes up all the way on a political level. It bypasses a planning or conceptual level, and then things get integrated in sectorial legislation or sectorial planning. I will try to show this when we go through it. The problem here is how to get an overview and a spatial perspective for the country as a whole. If we go through the history of that, the platform for informal coordination is EUROC. All the members are federal ministers, heads of Länder governments, the institutional associations of cities, municipalities, social partners. They're all there, but it is an informal platform. It was founded in 1971 by political will to have this coordinative approach, not to have to change the constitution and administration, to go through this way. And this platform is now producing spatial and integrated spatial development concept, and I compare it later with some sectorial approaches. So we had 1981, 99, 2001, and currently in preparation 2011. And I will show the history of these. We started out in 1981 with also a similar question, national cohesion. We had rather dramatic lagging regions from the viewpoint then. And of course, it was a situation where Austria was sort of belted through this iron curtain, with some of the regions lagging in behind, Eastern Austria lagging in behind in development to the western part. So that was an economic bottom-up approach to give national support to such regions, give nationals, very much like what the EU is doing to regions of less development now. That was the focus, 1981. Very much to be explained with you look at the population density, the alpine regions, and some of the outer regions which are with less settlement and less economic development. The 91 focus had some change, was sort of more modern in terms of focusing on structural economic change. We had some regions of economic crisis, industrial breakdowns. Then we had still the less developed regions, and we had a higher awareness of environmental concerns. That was the major shift in the 91 concept. But there was no cartographic representation of what the planning objectives would be, where this should go. There was a very detailed matrix of who should do what, even giving institutions name and a time frame. They never took place, but it was very elaborate that way. So next, 2001, Austria in 95 joined the European Union. So for the first time in 2001, not in 91, European integration became a major topic in the spatial development concept for Austria. And so now all these issues you just mentioned, Austria as an economic location in Europe, sustainable use of resources, social integration, transport infrastructure, in a European perspective, urban regions versus local region, all that came up. There was in the document a mix of analysis and objectives and strategies, and the whole thing was very much process-oriented in the preparation phase. But no concrete plans, no concrete budget or binding objectives came out of the process. It is interesting to read, it's essential to understand what's going on, especially as in that period, but that's the status of this development concept. Now we can skip through this is the shift over time. We're now moving into 2011. We have an even more process-oriented approach now. There is a 1.5 year process of involving hundreds of people in working groups and discussion groups and reflection groups. It's pretty elaborate and complicated. The outcome is at the status now a 30-page policy paper consisting of 4 thematic pillars who may resemble in some of the names closely what you said: regional competitiveness, which means economic and locational competitiveness, solidarity in society, climate change and resource efficiency, and good governance. So these are very resemblant, but of course what it means in Austria and how these things are being handled is certainly different from what it means in your country. So we're there now. It's still in process and will be worked on. Now, one of the sectorial approaches which are also of interest for Serbia's future, of course, is the National Strategic Reference Framework for the Structural Funds money. For the first time, such a national document had to be prepared in 2006 before the structural fund period, which is now ongoing, 2007-2013. It was giving an indicative framework of what the 9 operational regional programs should contain. It was prepared during EUROC in a similar large process, and it has an ongoing reflection process, an annual reflection process on the success, and of course an evaluation in the middle of the period. What is the interesting thing for this? This was done the first time on a national level, and with this period, the regional level was not focused clearly as in the operational programs before, in the periods 95 to 2000 and 2006. They had clear regional focus below the Länder level, NUTS 2, NUTS 3 or NUTS 5 level. Now, these 9 operational programs are covering the country as a whole, and there are no specific spatial targets involved anymore. So we have a framework, but with very little spatial focus. And that is probably intending, and it may change the spatial impact of such a program. It is not really known. So, if you look at the map, and why this is so important to have this national plan that you just prepared. We have all this structural fund money, but not a national plan to distribute it spatially. And this map on a European scale shows in percent of the GDP how much European money is going through the structural funds into the regions. And there you see, for Austria, it is very little, below 1%, below even 0.5%. But for all new member states, and Serbia will hopefully join, it is a very important instrument. This is 3–4%, even be higher than 4% of the GDP annually going into the country for regional development. It happened for Greece, it happened for Portugal and Spain, even for Ireland for a long time, and it helped those countries a lot. And it also helps, of course, the new member states in the European Union. And to use this money in accordance with the spatial plan is probably the most interesting and the most important challenge for Serbia in the future. You can see maybe why this is not the case in Austria. It is not so important. Maybe. That's another interpretation. But this for the future, now you have laid the groundwork, which is of extreme importance, and it explains why the President and the Prime Minister is working with you so closely. I think it is so important. Next. What is, in terms of sectorial planning, important in Austria is the infrastructure plan. And it goes for rail and road. And it comes every 1 to 3 years and is an update, 5 to 10 year update of the investment program, the federal investment program priority projects. And you see there are some major tunnels and major high-speed tracks indicated here, which take a lot of money of the total budget in Austria, and they may be very important in changing the spatial accessibility, especially here of the southern part of Austria, which is lagging in behind. The question still is, and it is not being discussed at a national level, if the allocation of such much money is justified in terms of economic and regional development terms. So we have a separate planning with their individual objectives and targets for federal infrastructure, separated from the spatial development concept. which I think is a problem. So, maybe next. We have this general approach I just said. This is a pragmatic adaptation of infrastructure plan according to budgets and of course local or regional needs and interventions. But it does not have behind an integrated mobility concept which really shows together the impact of car traffic, public transportation. It does not go from the spatial levels, national, into the cities or into regional traffic. So there is a separation of content. It does not work together as it should. So we should go on into the, what are the challenges? And we've seen the institutional concept, we've seen the instruments now. What are spatial development trends and problems? We have somewhat similar, but not the same kind. We have a very strong, of course, center, and then some smaller cities. It's not 24, it's a much lower number of cities compared to Serbia. And large rural areas with low population density. This is relevant for the future. We have, with that center of Vienna, if you look at the gross domestic product for the Vienna region, it is very important. The other central regions here, they are together way beyond 50% of the national GDP is in central regions, so they are very important. We have scenarios for the future development. Europe produced spatial development scenarios 2030, where they had 4 integrative scenarios for the future with different assumptions about economic and political environment. High growth, stable. High competition, globalization takes over. High security, Austria is doing just what it can do without else. And a high risk, playing for the future. So these were 4 integrative scenarios they played for the country, and they had, for all of them, they had these basic mega trends like globalization, aging society, etc. behind those. They were going through certain images of what this would mean at certain spatial levels. What does it mean for agglomerations? What does it mean for rural regions? And then they come up with population development scenarios for age groups in certain areas of Austria, and what does this mean for the country. We have 7 spatial development trends. They come up as a key result, which hold through all 4 scenarios. Whatever happens, this seems to hold. This seems to happen in all 4 scenarios. We have high growth of agglomerations and regional centers through in-migration into those centers from the country and from outside. So this means land use, high growth into the land, real estate prices, high costs of mobility for commuting. Intensified land use in rural regions, on the other hand, through rising demand for renewable energies. So a different kind of land use, not for building so much, for housing, but for using, producing biomass or wind or water or solar energy. So there's a different kind of land use with different kinds of impacts on landscape. Then we have strong competition of economic relations and competitiveness of locations for knowledge and skills. There is a competition for knowledge and skills, which tends to strengthen attractive location and tends to leave weaker ones behind. Then in Austria, specifically important, we have a shift of tourism to the higher regions in the Alps, summer and winter, for both causes, for climate change effects and because the draw of the large touristic centers is so strong. So we have a problem with the less competitive centers. Then we have some substantial shrinking of population in peripheral rural areas, which leaves an aging population in rural areas. with high demand of social services, but at the same time, weaker communities or municipalities were in a difficult situation to pay for that demand. So there's a difficult situation coming up in rural areas. And of course, in those areas, the relevant linkage is with the agglomerations growing, is commuting. So there seems to be the danger in all scenarios that commuting is not being reduced, but rather expanded for the future, which causes high costs and high energy demand. And then, overall, which takes place in and around Austria, of course, the growing importance of cross-border functional regions in economic terms, in labor market terms, and there you will have all these mobility effects across the national borders. So, just to illustrate some of these points I made, we have this population projection, eastern region of Austria growing very fast, city of Vienna growing very fast, which we did not have 20 years ago or 15 years ago, which we will have to adapt. But we have shrinking regions in large parts of the Alpine area where we do not really have a policy to deal with. Then, next. If you look at the economic situation, the strong economic centers here, some strong touristic centers in the west, but there is little attractive touristic or economic activity in exactly the core areas where we have the demographic problematic situation. So there's no answer for this. We have the cross-border regions linking Austria. Of course, this has changed the country around in the last 20 years massively to have these growing regions rather than have a wall next to Vienna. And this is the cause for, of course, the growth of Vienna and the eastern region. This really has changed dramatically. After the war, the eastern region of Austria has been slower growing than the rest, but now, for the next years, we expect it will be the other way around. Now, what shall we do? What are the challenges? To summarize, we think that one of the main challenges is with this strong growth and strong growing region to have compact urban agglomerations developing resource and energy efficient, really well fitted to future mobility systems which do not in all regions exist. We have to do active restructuring of existing spatial structures. There is the problem that we had this suburbanization in the last 20, 30, 40 years. They are not adequate. They have bad building quality. In terms of energy and climate, this is terrible. This has to be done. Renewable energy production and distribution, mining natural resources, and landscape. There is so far no clear link between landscape protection and this new demand to produce renewable energy, with the exception of wind energy, where some attempts to plan this. But in general, this pair does not be linked. Then we need a regrouping of economic activities. You mentioned that you have to really start building up industrial activities from scratch. We have the other situation, we have a lot of industrial and manufacturing and service activities, but they change their spatial demands. They changing locations. And this is an opportunity for the future to bring those economic activities into spatial locations where they can be accessed with public transportation in much better ways than now. But this will need a specific policy to do that. It does not exist. Then we need to maintain good public service provision in rural areas with aging population, rising service needs, and shrinking public finance. This is a real problem to overcome. All this is, of course, the background is a climate change. This is the rising summer temperatures in Vienna. And we have the Austrian performance according to the Kyoto process. It does not perform where it should go. And this is the background which we do not really bring together in economic and spatial planning terms. So this is the challenge, I think, still open the gap. I said a number of things of what we really should do. I may just show a few pictures at the end and skip this and say this together with the pictures. What does it mean for Vienna? It means reorienting the city towards the east. We have, for the first time in 2005, a regional perspective was developed for Vienna, for the city of Vienna. It means into the city, going into the city, having new locations of great economic importance, which are linked with rail to our new neighbors. I really say new on the brackets. These are important economic locations, also mixed with residential use. And if you look at one of these, Siemens is putting their science city concentrated in one of these locations, directly linked to Bratislava on the rail track. We have a new challenge, is going do this spatial planning cross-border. There is just in the process now a master plan for the cross-border region of Salzburg together with Bavaria, where there is a very detailed spatial development master plan now agreed by both regions what should happen where, and it shows that there is a close link across the border where two centers can be linked with public transport and create attractive locations. And one of these is inside Salzburg, inside the rail. It is a most central location that you can have, most attractive in theory and planning, but it is used with old transport facilities, old rubbish, old manufacturing buildings. And it could be the new center for Salzburg in the future. That's the idea, to rethink and restructure in existing cities. That's the challenge here. To end, and maybe to lead over to the discussion we will have later, we had in the OER with our colleagues, and Boris was involved a couple years ago, drafted in 2001 the first scenario of developing the Danube belt, the Danube region, and there were some ideas of economic development, natural protection, and how this could happen in this area. It is extremely important for Austria, and if you now talk about the Danube strategy, linking these regions, and what Boris said about the 13 ports is really going to my heart because it is so terrible. How can we really develop a Danube belt if all the ports are destroyed? And the opportunity to have a sustainable transportation mode is destroyed that way. We are in Austria now rethinking and starting to increase the harbor capacity, which were long neglected, but it only can work together in that region if all the partners in the region and in the Danube strategy work together to use this opportunity for the future to have sustainable modes of transportation. And that image shows that within that long belt along the Danube, there's a lot of opportunity for potential cross-border economic development. And this would really be a sustainable kind of economic development if we together in this boat could develop it that way. Thank you very much.